is not science. It's an art. It's called tuning. It's called tuning because it's like tuning a piano or tuning a guitar. It's not science. Right? All of these tuning methods just give you a starting point, and you're supposed to improve on them. Now that leads me to the definition of good control. My definition of good control is possibly not the same as a production manager's definition of good control. My definition of good control is where the process variable is near enough to the set point. Near enough. It would be nice to be precisely on set point, but frankly that's a luxury. My definition of good control is when the valve moves, makes a couple more little moves, and then stops moving. My definition of good control is when there is no valve movement. The main reason I want to have no valve movement is because I am incredibly lazy. And as the instrument person, it's my job to go and service the valve. So the less it moves around, the less I'm going to have to service it. The other reason is, when everything is stationary, when all of the valves and all of the actuators are stationary, by definition, that must be the most stable part. So really, for good control, everything should be pretty well stationary. So I'd like the valve to make a few control moves and then stop moving. You can have really excellent process variable on set point type control like this. You could have, here's a set point, you could have a process variable which goes bang and then sits exactly on set point. But if the valve is doing this, then that's no good, because although you're achieving set point, you're completely screwing up the valve. And it's not going to do anybody any good if they have to shut down every week for you to put a new valve on. So good control is when the valve is not moving much. Just the occasional little tickle, little nudges, nothing major. Old Leonardo da Vinci, he was in the Da Vinci Code, he was in that film, I think. Now, he said you should study the science of art and the art of science. And remember that all things are connected to all other things, to each other. Now, why that's important to us is that you must remember, if you are tuning one little loop, if you're tuning, I've got a little loop here, I've got a flow valve, here's my flow valve, and here's my flow transmitter. Oh, flow transmitter. There's a flow transmitter, there's a flow valve. Okay, I'm tuning that little loop. It's a tiny little valve, oh, say 50 millimeters cross-section pipe. So I'm going to tune just that little flow loop. If I throw that flow loop into oscillation by doing trial and error or sustained oscillation method, I'm going to oscillate the flow through that valve. I'm also going to oscillate the pressure in this main header. That main header might be a 250 millimeter header. So what I've done is I've just oscillated the pressure in the main header because I'm oscillating my little valve. Now I'm thinking, oh, it doesn't really matter if I oscillate my little valve. But because I've oscillated the pressure in that header, then another valve has to try and oscillate to try and keep up. And this valve here, this is on a 150 millimeter line. So this is a big valve that's trying to oscillate to keep up with the little valve. So he's trying to compensate for the changes in header pressure, right? Now, when this big valve starts oscillating, that really, really oscillates the main header. At this point, by the way, there is no way I'm going to be able to tune this valve because my main header pressure is oscillating. So I'm no longer in control of this flow. The header's in control of this flow. So the valve's doing nothing. So I've completely lost all ability to tune anyway. But I'm oscillating the big header now because of this big valve. Because I'm oscillating the big header, then you'll probably find that you're oscillating the boiler. And if you start oscillating the boiler, then you tend to oscillate the boilerman. And if you oscillate the boilerman, that's never a good thing, because they get very upset very quickly. So you should never allow anything to oscillate. Because even if you oscillate the smallest thing, because everything is connected to everything else, there's every chance you'll oscillate the entire factory or mine site. So oscillating methods are completely forbidden. So you are not allowed to do trial and error, and you're not allowed to do sustained oscillation. You are only allowed to do the open loop method, because the open loop method does not oscillate. Okay, in the early days, in the olden days I should say, we used to talk about this thing called quarter amplitude decay. And what quarter amplitude decay meant was, if that was my set point, I expect my flow to do this: overshoot, undershoot, overshoot, and settle. So that each overshoot is a quarter of the size of the previous one. That was considered to be perfect control. You see, this control is on the ragged edge of oscillation. It's very nearly oscillating, but it's not quite. So it's really good control. A more damped, natural response would look like this. Now, quarter amplitude decay was considered to be much better because of the fact that with quarter amplitude decay, you were pretty well within set point, around about, here-ish. Whereas with damped control, you're not within set point until around about here-ish. So, quarter amplitude decay meant you got to set point maybe 5% faster, maybe 10% faster, which, you know, in most terms, in terms of flow loop, that might be a second, maybe 2 seconds. In terms of a level, that could be a couple of minutes. So you get to set point maybe a couple of minutes earlier with quarter amplitude decay than you would for a natural response curve. The problem I have with quarter amplitude decay is that it's nearly oscillating. It's at the edge of oscillation. Now, what we try and do instead is we try and tune loops for what's called robustness. Robustness means its ability to deal with changes. The sort of changes I'm talking about are the sort of changes that we in WA see on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to take a tank stuck out on a mine site. It's a tank full of water, nothing esoteric, just a tank full of water. Middle of the day, my tank, middle of the day, it's getting to 46 degrees C. Middle of the night, I'm getting down to 0 degrees C. Now, density-wise, I'm seeing a, 1% change in density? So I'm seeing a 1% change in density, not too dire change in density. But viscosity-wise, viscosity is the slipperiness of a substance. Viscosity is a measure of how easily something will slip down a pipe, for instance. Viscosity-wise, daytime, I'm at 0.63 Pascal seconds, meter Pascal seconds. At night time, I'm at 1.79 meter Pascal seconds. Now, without going into details of how this works, what this basically tells me is that during the daytime, the water will flow about 3 times faster than during the night time. So, water at 46 degrees C is completely different from water at 0 degrees C. If I were to go in this at night time and tune it all up, because night time I've got an easy shift, so I go in at night and tune this all up with water at 0 degrees C, what I would almost certainly find, if I did quarter amplitude decay at 0 degrees C, so that I was getting a lovely response like this, I would find daytime I would get uncontrollable oscillation, because water has changed between daytime and nighttime. What I need to do instead is tune it in more robust a way. If I'm going to be tuning it at nighttime, I'll tune it so that at nighttime it's much slower, so that at daytime it might be getting a little bit beyond quarter amplitude decay into the decay in oscillation region, but at least it's able to control in both areas. So robust control means able to deal with all circumstances. It might mean that you don't get to set point as quickly, but quite frankly, I can't remember ever getting called out by an operator to say, look, it took 5 seconds longer to get to set point. Most operators don't care, but the number of times I've been called out to oscillating loops is just not funny. So I would rather have a slower loop than a loop which is near to oscillating. That's not to say I'm going to put up with a loop which is horribly, horribly slow. I want to get to set point, within my own lifetime or within my period of interest, and I have a very short attention span. But I'm not going to try and be too clever. I'm not going to go for quarter amplitude decay, which frankly only gives you points with TAFE lecturers. The instrument police are very rarely going to be looking over your shoulder to make sure that it's perfect quarter amplitude decay. You're better off going for a little bit more damping and getting a little bit more reassurance that it's more robust.